Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the ICG's Digital Academy webinar series. I'm Sally Alsop, and with Lucy Wernick, I run the webinar programme for the ICG. So this morning, we're delighted to welcome Aura representative Ruth Hinton and ICG member Nick Bonney. With a career in client-side consumer insight spanning over 20 years and a background in psychology, Ruth Hinton specialises in understanding the people behind the numbers and collaborating with colleagues to drive improvements for customers. Ruth is currently Group Head of Customer Experience at View International and also Chair of Aura, the UK's biggest community exclusively for client-side researchers. Nick has been a member of the ICG since 2018, when he set up Deep Blue Thinking. He has seen the research industry from many different angles, with roles as an interviewer, a field manager, an agency exec, right through to MD. And he worked as a client for nearly 20 years, serving on the Aura Council. On the 8th of May this year at Quirks London, Aura launched its Working Well Together Charter. Nick saw the Aura Charter as a chance to get the industry to work more effectively together and volunteered to get involved. So during this webinar, Ruth and Nick will shed some light on what the Charter is all about, its aims, and the implications for clients, agencies, and ICG members. As we go through, perhaps you could type your questions in the chat box. There's a point during the presentation when we'll be looking at any questions. But there'll also be, as usual, a Q&A session at the end when you'll be encouraged to turn on your webcams and raise your hand if you'd like to join the discussion or you've got a question to ask of either Ruth or Nick. So here are the upcoming events in our calendar. So we've still got plenty more for you during July. Do sign up for some of these events, particularly the summer party, and we look forward to seeing you on here again soon. Don't forget that we're able to offer great value sponsorship opportunities with each of our webinars and online events, and all you have to do is to contact Lucy if you want to know a little more about that. So now I'm going to hand over to our speakers, Ruth and Nick.
Great, so if I share my screen, I'll bring up our slides. Great, okay, so I'm Ruth, I work at View, but oh, hang on, that's the wrong version of my Working Well Together slide. I've got many webinars on this at the moment. So Nick, do you want to introduce yourself and your role in the Charter while I find the right slide?
Well, we're trying to see Phil. Yeah, well, I mean, Sally's already done a bit of an intro. I suppose just a bit of context. So as Sally had mentioned, I previously used to sit on the Aura Council when I was a client. And so I've always kind of remained relatively in close contact with the Aura team. And when Ruth and Suzanne were starting to look at Working Well Together Charter and they were looking for people to input, I think at the time I was having a few LinkedIn rants about late payments, and that certainly put me on Suzanne's radar. And so at that point we started to have a couple of conversations about not only, I suppose, how agencies and clients work well together, but particularly thinking about it from an independent point of view, because there are some unique things for us that probably are slightly different even to other research agencies out there.
Brilliant. Yeah, thanks, Nick. And we've really appreciated your input on this, as well as other agency partners and lots of Aura members and clients. So what we'll do today is talk a bit about what this initiative is and how it was developed. We'll spend a bit of time talking about the principles that are in the Charter. And at that point, we'd love your feedback. This is very much intended to be a feedback loop as to how we can really make this live for clients. We in Aura are the community of the client side, and this is where we are focused to try and drive change. We would love your support and we would love your feedback on how we can have this impact. So we'll spend a bit of time chatting at that stage. Then we'll talk about how you can get involved after today, and then we'll take any of your questions at the end. So why Aura created the Working Well Together Charter? Well, we're aware of well-being and mental health as an important topic in our sector. And we as Aura, the community of client-side researchers, felt we had a unique position here to contribute. There's lots of amazing initiatives that are at the individual company level. or are at a team level, but we really felt that interface between clients and agencies is something that we can influence. So we have a community of 190 companies across the UK, and that's over 700 individuals who do the client-side insight role like me. And so we wanted to make our contribution here. So the work we do is valuable and important, but it can be stressful. So we took our lead from the research that the MRS had done over the last few years, measuring amongst colleagues across the sector, mental health and well-being, and the amount of people reporting poor mental health, including stress, in the last 12 months has remained stubbornly high, and that's despite all of these amazing initiatives. So something else needs to be done. And the research dug into the reasons behind that, and it was often having too much to do, the stress of impending deadlines, the risk in projects going wrong and individuals feeling the pressure of that, the demands from clients, and that resulting in a poor work-life balance. So we felt if we can get involved with something preventative, because that's the other thing about a lot of the initiatives in our industry, it's often about supporting people and picking them up when they are struggling, which is really important and necessary to do. But perhaps we can take a step back a little earlier in the process and stop some of those stresses becoming more of a problem, play our part in having more productive partnerships that are less stressful, less impactful, and hopefully we can stop some of those reasons. So it was a cross-industry collaboration. So Aura's starting point was to speak to our members and find out how they thought we could play a role here. So we had some focus group sessions with our own members talking about when in the process the pressures arise. We talked about examples of things that have gone wrong and felt uncomfortable, times when we were aware that we had passed on stress and pressure to our agency partners. Those calls were actually quite therapeutic. It was quite an interesting process to kind of talk about those things. We then invited those members, and we did it amongst our Aura team as well, to consult a whole range of industry partners. So big agencies, small agencies, and including micro businesses and independents like Nick and like others on the page, and hearing from them what are the themes around when things are going wrong so that we can turn that more positively into ways to prevent that. So that led to some documents which you can read on the Aura website. So the Working Well Together report is a summary of the themes that we heard. We then went back to our members again and said, if these are the themes, what are the things that we as clients can do? There are some things that are out of our control. There are processes in our business that we can't necessarily control, but what are the bits that we can control in our research and insight projects? And it came down to these 6 themes. So this is the Working Well Together Charter. So these are commitments we make as clients when we're working with our agency partners. So when we ask you for a proposal, we'll respect your time. And if you go onto the Aura website, you'll see there's a document around the charter, and it has bullet points under each of these of the sorts of things we would do if we're respecting your time when we ask for proposals. So examples we've heard of this are, if we're really not going to need 5 proposals, don't ask for 5. We're aware of the multiplicative impact of that and the low chance of winning the work. And that's part of the frustration and stress and pressure if you're working hard and it's not getting you anywhere. So we'll try and be realistic about what the chances are. We'll be clear that this is a brief that you should propose against. We've already consulted our stakeholders. This brief is the one you should propose against. We are asking for what we need in that proposal. If others come along with extra bells and whistles, that shouldn't be what we're judging the proposal on. We're going to try and judge them on the things that we've put into the document. So we're not leaving you second guessing about how to impress us. We've told you how to impress us. So it's all about respecting people's time. So I'll just run through all 6 and then we'll come back and have a discussion with Nick about which ones in particular we thought were relevant to this community. So second is that we commit that when we work with you, we'll commit to open and honest conversations at all times. So we want to avoid that scope creep that happens accidentally. We want to acknowledge that power imbalance where sometimes our agency partners are nervous of coming back to us with challenges or asking us to make decisions between time, cost and quality. We want to be open and honest about the context in which we're working. So to tell you more about our stakeholders and the business topic, because that's going to enable you to do your best work and not have to guess. But by committing to this, we hope that any issues that come along during the process can be raised and addressed. So we had an example in the panel when we launched this of one of our Aura members saying that she had started this with her agencies, and she had said, I commit to this open and honest conversation, and her agency did raise a problem, and it was uncomfortable, but she had committed that she would listen to that, and it was much better raised during the project rather than waiting for the wash up at the end. But that wash up at the end is also important to reflect on that process and make sure we can learn for the next time. So open and honest conversations at all times, so before, during and after the project. Number 3 is we'll leave you to do your best work by managing our side of things as a client well. So that's about us checking in with our stakeholders, communicating the deadlines to those stakeholders. We heard in the themes that sometimes there might be an inexperienced client manager or someone who is in a difficult position who's receiving stress and pressure from their stakeholders and passing it on to their agencies because they're not sure how else to intervene in that process. So we're trying to anticipate some of that and say we're thinking about that from the beginning. We also heard examples of times when the client is really eager for regular check-ins. Tell me how it's going. What are the supposed top lines from the research that's just happened? But we heard from our agency partners that eats into the time to actually do the work. It puts them on the spot to share their work before they've had proper thinking time. So we shouldn't be asking for unnecessary check-ins just to reassure ourselves. We as clients should be trusting our agency partners that they're doing their best work. We'll take care of our side and leave you to do your side. Number 4 is we'll treat you as an extended part of our team. So we heard from some agency partners who felt like they were the outsider and they were kind of being put up to be shot down, whereas it's a much more productive conversation on both sides. If the agency do feel like they're part of the insight team, they get access to more of the business context. They are more motivated, more engaged by feeling part of it and some of that ownership, and their knowledge and skills are respected. And we heard from clients that that feels really good to them as well. I'm an insight team of 1, and it can be really helpful to have the agencies feel like part of my team and feel invested alongside me as well. Number 5, we'll respect your right to disconnect. So of course there is sometimes out of hours work, field work in particular, but the way we framed this conversation in the end, after feedback from both agency and client partners, was this is about having those conversations up front about ways of working. So we do have some stakeholders, some of my team here, who will be emailing in the evenings because that's what suits their work pattern, but she absolutely doesn't expect a reply in the evening. She's just moving her work along. And so if we try and be clear about the times when it is the sort of project that's going to spill into other hours versus the times when it fits into normal office hours, which should be the norm. Respecting your right to disconnect is also about saving those times for when it really is urgent. And in our panel that Nick joined at the Quirks conference, we had one of our Aura members say, we really need to avoid crying wolf. And we should save it for the times when it's really urgent and important, because that's when, yes, it's still stressful, but it's stressful for a reason. And we're trying to remove those unnecessary stresses, those times when you feel like you've worked really hard, but what was it really for? There's no satisfaction in that. So respecting your right to disconnect by having some of those ways of working agreed up front. And then number 6, we'll commit to proper feedback. So knowing that people put a lot of heart, soul, time and energy into proposals, into projects, into recommendations, we want to, as clients, play our role to close the loop and help give feedback. So feedback on proposals, why was the winner chosen, to give some proper information. We were really kind of upset and surprised to hear about the amount of ghosting that happens. Like, I'm surprised because I wouldn't do that, but it clearly is a problem where some people are just not hearing back at all, and that's not something that we should do as clients. And if it happens accidentally, well, then that's still not good enough. We need to be more deliberate about some of these things. So proper feedback on proposals, but proper feedback on what happens afterwards as well. For example, one of my agencies did a lovely project last year that ended up dragging on a little bit. We weren't ready to finish the last stages, so I imagine it started to feel quite frustrating for them. However, they delivered really good quality stuff, and it's genuinely changed conversations here at View. So now I remember, because that agency, I'm trying to treat them as an extended part of our team, I've committed to proper feedback. I'm sending them examples of how their research is being applied. So at View, we run cinemas across Europe. We've got a focus on family audiences. And when I can see my marketing team have absolutely addressed the insight that the agencies have found, I'm sending that to the account team. I don't have a project live with that agency anymore, but I feel like they're invested. And it's so nice when I can say, look, because of what you told us, this is how we're framing our offer to families. And that really helps me as a client as well, because I should be wanting this impact and I should be saving up these examples. It's great for me building the kind of business case for research in my company as well. And we know the impact it can have when work can be stressful, urgent, tough. To have that sense of satisfaction, at least it was worth something, and hopefully that becomes more motivating and more positive. So those are the 6 principles in the charter. So as I said, when we did the launch at Quirks, Nick kindly joined our panel, as well as having helped us frame some of this. So Nick, there were some of these that you thought were particularly important to this community of freelancers, independents and micro businesses.
Yeah, I suppose before diving into the 6, because there are some things about the community within the ICG that are unique and actually make this charter even more relevant, which is, I suppose, firstly, there are probably more senior former clients in this group than there are in the wider agency landscape. I could see a couple of familiar names already of people who've led big client-side teams, whether it's Jane or Danny. Actually, I think there are people who've got a bit more empathy of understanding what it's like both sides. Quite often, I think we're dealing with non-research buyers, because we might be working with smaller businesses where the client is the founder or is the marketing director, or it might be. And actually, we're probably more used to working in partnership with each other, these kind of flexible groups, because we need to bring in the right skills to deliver a job. However, I suppose despite saying that, that doesn't mean these things aren't relevant to us, because actually we are both supplier and client in many of the projects that we run. Right? I'm dealing with people who I'm doing work for, but I'm also working with partners, with field vendors, with stats people, whatever it might be. So I think all of them apply to us as to whether we're wearing our, I suppose, partner client hat or supply hat. However, when we look at the 6, I mean, I think part of the original discussion we're having when the charter first came around, I suppose, is this element around particularly respecting time, and the fact that as independents, it's not like we have the dedicated new business team that are out there looking at pitches and proposals and kind of out hunting for work. And so I suppose for us to kind of give up that time to write a proposal is time away from revenue generating work, as being cynical, that we're doing the doing and stuff that actually we're getting paid for. So I suppose that's where that kind of proper feedback and respecting time loop, I think, for independence can feel quite personal, right? Because if you've invested quite a lot of time, it feels a very personal thing. You've given up time that you could have been earning for, and then you don't get any feedback. So I suppose that was part of the conversation we were having with Suzanne at the start around just making sure that time is respected.
Yeah, brilliant. And I wonder if anyone wants to type into the chat, which of these do you think is of most value to your work and your position in the industry? We very much want to keep this charter alive with momentum, with a feedback loop, so that we can gather examples of how important it is, and hopefully soon examples of positive impact that it's having. And then that can form part of the feedback loop to go back to more clients and say there are positive benefits here for everyone involved in the ecosystem of working in this way. And Nick, when we were on the panel at Quirks, there was a couple of others that you kind of picked out, and perhaps some of the examples about some of the unintended consequences of some of the client stakeholder behaviours.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think I was giving the example of the kind of right to disconnect, and actually to some extent how a lot of those things are arisen from unintentional behaviour. So similar to the example that Ruth was giving before, when I worked at Lottery, Sally, who was our CMO at the time, used to put her kids to bed, and then she used to work for about 3 hours. And so we would all suddenly get the kind of bing, bing, as we know Sally's back online after dinner. But because she sat at the top of the tree, actually that kind of created an impact for a few hundred people around the business, because she would email a direct report, someone like me, then it gets farmed out to someone in the team, then it goes to an agency. And so there were hundreds of people that essentially were now mobilized around what essentially was Sally just doing her emails in front of the TV because that's what worked for her. But nobody had ever told her that, and nobody ever had that open and honest conversation to say, Sally, you do realize that you're ruining hundreds of people's evenings, like multiple days a week. And as soon as that feedback got back to her, instantly her behavior changed. So she's like, well, fine, I'm going to save it in my outbox. If I do ever really need you, because I don't know, we've got a massive PR issue, whatever it might be, you might get a WhatsApp, and at that point it's kind of all systems go, we need to do something. But I suppose overnight, just that one person changing their behavior transformed, I mean, literally hundreds of people's lives. So it really does kind of come back to, I suppose, how closely connected point 5 and point 6 are on this slide, which is quite often the consequence that could be causing you quite a lot of pain in terms of that right to disconnect. The person who's causing it doesn't actually realize they're doing it, and nobody's ever told them that this is the impact of their behavior.
Yeah, I thought that was such an interesting example, and also the positive response that the team got from that senior stakeholder when they just hadn't realised. They weren't offended when someone spelt that out to them. It was just a kind of a blind spot, really, and potentially there are other blind spots. So hopefully if we get more clients to sign up to saying, when we work with you, number 2, when we work with you, we'll commit to open and honest conversations at all times. I'd hope if I've said this to my agency partners, they would say to me, oh, there might be some unintended consequences here. Like, again, we're aware of sometimes of the awkwardness of the power dynamic, but hopefully if your client has said up front, I'm committing to open and honest conversations, then there is license to kind of raise some of those things that otherwise might get missed.
Ruth, I can see something's made a point around late payments. Actually, can I address that, because it's
totally, and I'd like to as well.
Favourite of mine.
And it is in point number 3. So yeah, please do bring that up.
Yeah, I suppose it's covered in a couple of areas really, which I suppose, so it is covered in the sub bullets of number 3. I think recognizing that it is respectful to pay people on time. I do think the other ethos around that is also within 4, which is, look, big corporates sometimes can be rubbish, and somebody in supplier payments might not realize that they've skipped a step in approval. I think what we have a right to ask from our clients is that they don't turn around and go, not my problem. And actually, as a research buyer, certainly I would have been in that position when I was on the other side of the fence, that they take it as their responsibility to help resolve that issue for their vendors. So I think we can all, sadly, have to accept that sometimes things go wrong. Oh, hello. But we need to make sure that, I think, when we should expect our research clients to help us resolve those issues when they happen. I suppose the most frustrating thing is when somebody says, oh, you need to speak to supplier payments. I don't think that's on. And so I think we've got and I think certainly in the conversations we had in designing the charter, there is a recognition that buyers need to help vendors resolve some of those, suppliers resolve some of those issues.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's not explicit at this level of the principles, but yeah, it's explicitly written into point number 3, because Nick raised this as an important topic. So as we say our side of managing our side of things well is some of that infrastructure about how we get you set up on the system and chasing that through for you, sticking to those payment terms. As Nick said, not sending you off to accounts payable, speaking to accounts payable ourselves on your behalf. So yeah, that is there in that space. And again, if I'm a client who's committed to open and honest conversations, I would be open to my agency saying, this has got stuck, can you unlock this for me? Some might be reluctant to raise that, but if I've committed to open and honest conversations, then you should raise that with people like me.
And can I ask a question of the group, actually, because I see lots of the comments that have come in chat are kind of related to that position we play as consultants and suppliers to big clients. I'm interested in how people feel this applies to us as partners with each other, and the way that we work with each other, the way that we work with recruiters, with panel companies. So I suppose, do we, because we're quite rightly, and I've just said, we get aggrieved when we don't think we're being treated fairly or respectfully, but I think there is an importance for us to sign up to this in terms of the principles of the way that we work with each other, right? And so actually, if remembering that if the proposal you wrote hasn't gone in, that you did actually ask those field vendors for a quote, and making sure that you close the loop and you haven't unintentionally ghosted somebody there, which is quite easy to do. So I suppose a question and thoughts from the group as to how we could apply these 6 principles to the way that we work with our suppliers and with each other, or even come off mic and shout, whatever works.
Yeah, if you either want to type your thoughts in, or if you do want to raise your hand or come on camera and on mic, then yeah, happy to have a chat about that topic. So I can see in the chat people also talking about the importance of number 4 being treated as an extended part of the team, partly because if that attitude is up front, then the rest might follow. And partly because then that allows you to be closer to the category, the business, the project, and therefore have more impact. Yeah, that's a great point. Someone's agreed.
Hand up.
Please.
Yeah, I was just, I know that there have been a few situations where I've responded to a client bid and been ghosted, and I've asked a number of fieldwork companies to provide quotations for the fieldwork aspect of the project that I was bidding for. And if you don't hear back from the client, that means that you aren't able to give a proper definitive answer to the fieldwork suppliers that you've asked to bid for the work. So there's a knock-on effect as well as just the direct effect on the person who's writing the proposal for you.
Yeah, and I can see Matt's just made a really similar point in chat, and I think when we were chatting prior to this call, Sally, that sense that it is an ecosystem, we're all connected, right? So if we don't get feedback from the client, we maybe don't give feedback to the field partners or the recruiters, and so that kind of ripple at the top starts to trickle all the way down in terms of how people feel that that relationship's gone. And that's not just in a new business scenario, but even at the end of a project, right? If you don't get feedback about what has gone well or why it didn't go well, you can't pass that on to other people either.
Exactly.
Yeah, great. So this point about it being an ecosystem, so that's something that we can talk to the clients about as well, because we're trying to find kind of points of leverage to change behavior amongst clients. So one of the steps is to make them aware of these principles. Another of the steps is that in the chat, someone's acknowledged it does come down to respect, and absolutely, that's kind of the theme of all of this, isn't it? It's respecting people's time, it's respecting people's energy, it's communicating with them in a respectful way and keeping them informed. We were trying to break it down into these 6 so that clients can more easily envisage how to change their behavior and perhaps like focus on a chunk at once. So you might be able to help us spread the awareness. And then also by chunking it up in this way, we're thinking part of our kind of ongoing communications and momentum around this might be a cycle of going through some of these 6 points and doing our communications in that way. I know Julia's on the call today. She's leading marketing for Aura now. Hi, Julia. And we were thinking about how to keep up the momentum on some of these things. So I think, again, these chunks around these 6 is really valuable. But I think also to then, as you've all pointed out, it's part of this ecosystem. It's putting some of you in a difficult position if you don't have the feedback to give to your partners further down the chain. That can be another way to kind of help kickstart a bit of a change process amongst the clients to help them envisage the impact of what they're having. It's not just this one agency that is kind of then left in limbo. There's other stakeholders involved in that ecosystem. So this is all really valuable feedback and kind of an information loop that helps us refine our communications to help drive this change.
I'm really sorry to add, can I say one more thing? I suppose we've talked a lot today about how these principles impact us as independents. I suppose if we take a slightly more altruistic view on it and think about what it means for the industry, Ruth referred to the research that the MRS had done on wellbeing, and I think there were a few people, and the ICG, myself included, who ended up moderating some of those sessions and the qualitative part of that project. I wouldn't underestimate just quite what a significant driver some of these issues are, both in terms of attracting and retaining talent within the industry. There are a lot of people who are thinking about leaving research as a career because, you know, points 3, 4, 5, 6 particularly are making it feel like quite an unfulfilling industry to be a part of, which, you know, somebody with grey hair who's been in it for a while feels quite sad. And I think, you know, we have a responsibility to try and solve some of these, not just for ourselves, but actually to try and make sure that the sector continues to thrive. Because I think there are a lot of REs, SREs, RMs who are kind of saying that, you know what, being at the end of this chain, and we've just discussed how everything is connected, can be quite an unfulfilling experience for people. And you know, I think we need to remember it's not just for us that we're looking at some of these principles, but for the industry as a whole.
Yeah, that's really useful. And again, that can help us communicate this in a slightly different way and kind of get people's attention and tug heartstrings a bit to drive behaviour change by thinking about some of these broader topics. We've been able to share this with the MRS, and then one of my Aura colleagues is presenting to the Senior Client Council at the MRS in a couple of weeks. They were thinking of producing something similar, which is great, which shows we're on the right lines. And now they've seen that there is this work underway. They're wondering how they can help us amplify it, and then what else can be complementary to it so that we're not duplicating efforts, but it all fits together really nicely. But yeah, that point about retaining great talent and keeping it feeling satisfying. There's increasingly going to be pressure from younger generations, as we know, but all generations really, of feeling like you are going into something that can be satisfying and look after your well-being, and some of that can be quite competitive in getting talent in as well. So yeah, that's a great point, Nick. So just checking in the chat for a couple of other comments. So someone's commented that number 4 around "we'll treat you as an extended part of our team." That can reflect on the positioning and management of the Insight team within their own organisation. So if the Insight team are allowing themselves to be stick fetchers, then that has a knock-on impact to their work with agencies. So yeah, I think that is really interesting. There's the kind of, as you've acknowledged, there's what the Insight team allow themselves to become, but there's also how the Insight team are positioned, what they're forced into. So in some organisations, you do succeed in getting that elevated position. You do succeed in leading the conversations. But to be honest, in my 20 odd years client side, it's been mixed, and it's not always been within my control. So again, that's part of how we're communicating this with clients, not that specifically, but just saying there's something in here for everyone, whether you're a big client team or a small client team, whether you have procurement restrictions or you're free to make your own decisions. We've tried to make it quite inclusive so that if you are the sort of agency that are just the sort of Insight team on the client team side who are responding to requests, there are still things you can do to make sure your team, your agencies feel part of your team, that you do the proper feedback that you can, even if that proper feedback is, my stakeholder is a nightmare. I've just got to get this done. I'm doing it because I've tried to challenge it and I'm backed into a corner, and this is something we've got to do. But I'm being open and honest with you about this. This won't be perfect this time, but you know what? This is an important stakeholder, and I'm really going to try and change this for the better next time. So I think sometimes maybe us kind of acknowledging the human side of this, of like, I'm finding it difficult, you will find this difficult with me, but can we try and figure out a way together, I think might be a more human way of doing it, rather than, and again, this was a theme going into the Quirks presentation, wasn't it, Nick? This them and us culture. We heard it in the consultation, it's a theme in the report that led to these principles, but too much thinking of, I am the client team and my agencies are slightly separate, but we're all human and there's lots of good stuff to be done by saying we're in this together, even if what we're in is a slightly rubbish, awkward project with a nightmare of a stakeholder.
Yeah, and I think, as you've just alluded to, is that getting to some of the open conversations around that is the heart, right?
Right.
Anyone who's spent any time in corporate life knows that sometimes, whatever acronym you want to use, right? The JFDI or Camelot, sometimes we used to have the AWI, which was Andy, our CEO. Andy wants it. So it doesn't matter what we say, we push back as much as we can, but this is now officially classed as an AWI. So, do you know what? We just need to get on with it. And I think just being transparent with suppliers, that sometimes that happens. But then equally, being open to the conversation and say, well, what is it that he really wants, right? Does he need everything delivered within a week? Or actually, is it really only these 2 numbers that he needs for the board presentation? In which case, let's do everything we can to get those things out first, even if that means pushing the main debrief back by a few days because we've kind of reordered stuff. And I think sometimes that conversation doesn't happen both ways. And so everybody ends up working till 3 in the morning to deliver stuff a week earlier. Whereas actually that wasn't really what was required. It might have just been the 3-4 numbers or the 1 slide that's got to go to shareholders, and the rest of it could still have come 2 weeks later. It didn't really matter, but that was the thing. So I think in the kind of haste to get stuff done, just making sure we do still have those open conversations. And James put a lot of comments in the chat. I know lots of the work that obviously the IMA do and people like that to try and support client side teams in terms of managing some of those things like stakeholder mapping, managing stakeholders, I think are invaluable, but recognizing that, sometimes we still just have to get stuff done. So I think we're kind of understanding of that. It's just making sure that there is that conversation. It's the important things.
Yeah, brilliant. And being realistic and kind of taking a breath and saying, what is the bit that's really important in this? What's the minimum that will meet that need, and frame the rest of the stuff around it. Yeah, that's a great point. So a couple of other comments in the chat. So there used to be stuff in the MRS Code of Conduct related to some of this, such as not asking more than 3 agencies to pitch. Not sure if that sort of thing is still there. And of course, not all client side team members are MRS members. So we're trying to, I guess, nudge that behaviour from a broader group of people. And there are some companies where your procurement team have insisted it's a 4-way or a 5-way pitch. So some of our members are trying to influence their procurement teams. So again, one of our Aura colleagues joined us on the panel and said he'd sat down with his procurement colleague, talked through the charter. It helped unlock a different sort of conversation about how you buy and commission research. So the message was procurement people are human too. But so sometimes it's not up to the client who's commissioning you how many proposals they get, but they should this should encourage them to think about that, because they're not only duplicating the work needlessly amongst suppliers who have a small chance of winning the work, they're multiplying their own work by having 5 proposals to review when fewer will do. So we're really trying to nudge that behaviour. And this is a kind of voluntary code, and not something that we have the resources or kind of leverage to really enforce. So this is all about soft influencing, which is why your feedback and your examples are so helpful to us to try and drive some of that change. Someone also made the point in the chat about how can we help less experienced client-side researchers who may be uncomfortable providing bad news or negative feedback or dealing with issues during a project. And I think that's a really important point. There's a couple of our members mentioned that as well, that this a way to influence change can be to position this as a training exercise, because there's lots of senior clients who say, of course I do all of this. Of course, this is the right thing. Oh, this isn't rocket science. Yeah, this is just like generally how we do our jobs. But we know when we're under pressure, that's when things can slip, and we don't necessarily do all of the right things in all of the right way when we're under pressure. But if we've got a client who feels like, yeah, I do this, it's like, okay, you do this, but do your team. And perhaps this can be a framework for you to help influence and train your team. So we're thinking this can be a good way to push it out to clients as well. We've got an Aura member who advocates for Aura because she feels like it's a really good way more generally of being training her team on aspects of research rather than them just learning from her. So I think we've got some leverage there. I think if you were an inexperienced or junior client-side person, it is going to be part of your development, isn't it, to kind of get through those difficult conversations, and hopefully frameworks like this can help you step through the process by thinking, right, if I've committed to proper feedback, if I've said I'm going to do step 6, then maybe that changes my behavior during the project as well, and makes some of those conversations which could be uncomfortable a bit less uncomfortable.
Yeah,
what do you think, Nick? Yeah,
I was going to say, and I've run a couple of training sessions with agencies, actually. It's the other way. I think we forget that for a lot of people starting out in their career agency side, most of them have no idea what it's like the other side of the fence. And so their ability to be able to have constructive conversations or ask for feedback or trying to understand how to do it is also quite limited, because you've got this kind of complete empathy gap between people who might not have either forgot what it was like the other side of the fence or have never been the other side of the fence. And I think the more that we can do, and say we're probably quite unique on this call, just looking at the number of people who have lived both sides of the fence, to kind of break down those barriers, I think the better, because there's so many people who've just got no idea what it is like to live or what the other person is going through. I think Danny's got his hand up as well.
Yeah, totally. Do you want to come in on that, Danny?
Yeah, so hi everybody. I was going to say the same. I was going to say similar to what Nick said, which is having being one of those rare people that have worked on both sides of the fence now. I don't think a lot of agencies understand the pressures that the client teams are under, and I certainly don't think that clients realize how small research agencies are, and how few people that they have in them. Not all of them, obviously. I'm not talking about Kantar and Ipsos, but a lot of agencies appear a lot bigger than they actually are. But actually, there's you can count the number of employees on one finger. So this whole aspect about time is really important. And I was going to ask you, Ruth, has Aura run anything where, you get a few agency owners in just to sort of explain life and how tough things can be? And it's a bit like Nick's point around, to a bit, when you're working in a big corporate, the fact that the invoice hasn't been paid is sort of irrelevant to you. Whereas if you're a micro business, you've already paid the money out. It's already gone out of your account 3 weeks ago. And I just wondered if you guys had run any sessions where you'd got some sort of agency people in just to share their stories and their grief.
So we haven't so far, but we're definitely hearing in our conversations today and in the run up to the charter as well, this empathy gap, I think, does need to be addressed. So that could be a way to go. Most of our Aura sessions are focused on the practical side of doing insight and inspiring the insight and focusing on what happens on the client world. And then, as you know, Danny, it was kind of in your tenure and probably in Nick's as well, that Aura opened the doors to agency partners. For decades, it had been a closed shop deliberately. And it is a community of insight managers sharing with each other, and having that kind of safe space amongst peers is really valuable. But what was a real breakthrough for Aura, like maybe 10, 15 years ago, maybe a bit longer, was to open the doors to more agencies and micro businesses coming to present to us, because there's amazing content, amazing skills, some great inspiration there. I think there could be a role for how we continue to bring this to life to close the empathy gap. I think also content like that can help us get the attention of more people across the industry as well. So we absolutely want to influence the clients. We're trying to influence our members, but there's a bigger population of clients out there who are not our members. And so I think some of that sort of content where we can involve agencies to start to tell their stories, then we also get the benefit of those agencies' networks. So it's all about these kind of networks to spread the word, and different ways to influence behavior, some of which is emotional leverage, some of it is practical examples of why clients should do it and how they benefit. I think
Yeah.
that's a really good shout to add to our kind of suite of communications around this.
Okay, that'd be great. Just because it happened a couple of nights ago, but I've just come back from Amsterdam and was at dinner with Mark Earls and Martin Oxley. And Martin, a few years ago now, did a presentation, I think it was SMR, the horror story, the world's worst debriefs. And he sort of just pulled together a whole list of sort of the worst debriefs that had ever happened. And it was a brilliant paper, very humorous. And I think what we don't want to do is we don't want to go in and sort of have a number of agency owners lecturing clients. It's not really about that. It's just about realization and understanding. And so when they were running through some of the very funny stories about the world's worst debriefs, I was thinking the same. I'm sure we've all got kind of the horror stories of ghosting or the horror stories of change of briefs. And adding a little bit of humor and desensitizing it might be quite a nice way of just opening up the conversation without lecturing. Add a bit of humor to it would be my suggestion. I think clients are intelligent enough to realize the points that we're making, rather than us just sitting there going, pay your invoices on time, don't change the objectives. I think if we came out with the world's worst change of briefs, then it might be quite interesting.
Yeah, and there was an amazing LinkedIn thread. I can't remember if it was earlier this year or it was last year, and it was like things an insight person hates to hear, and it just got so many amazing comments. One of them was like, "I've got a presentation tomorrow. Can you give me some insights?" And I was like, I literally had that in the office yesterday from our ops director. "Oh, I'm speaking at the cinema conference next week. Can you give me some insights about customers?" I'm like, "Okay, yeah, yes, but what's your theme? Why?" I mean, I've got oodles of them. So yeah, that sort of stuff is just kind of, yeah, we get it. Like, we're also some of this stuff that is about we're in it together. I think if it's stuff that both the client and the agency and their kind of partners in the ecosystem would recognize, that might help with some of this kind of collaboration of we're all in it together. So yes, that's great advice, a bit of humor. So I'm just going to move on to just a couple of slides on the next steps. Sorry, Nick, before I move on. Yeah, do you want to add?
I was going to just say one thing for 10 seconds, which is I know on the panel, one of the things that was a bit of an eye-opener for some of the clients in the room when we were talking about the fact that actually bear in mind that getting a reputation either as being a good client or a bad client actually has quite a big impact on the quality of people who work on your account, the amount of effort they put into it. And certainly anyone who's worked in a kind of medium or large agency, if clients get the reputation for being, frankly, a pain in the arse, then people ask to move off that account and they want to work on something different. And that's the same even, at our level. If we're working with recruiters or if we're working with field partners and they think, I don't know, the spec's not clear or it's never achievable, they are, even if not consciously, subconsciously going to prioritize working with the people that they enjoy working with and think is a fulfilling relationship. So it does have as you say, there's the right humor in kind of highlighting the horror stories, but there is a real business benefit in adhering to some of this stuff as well.
Totally, yeah, and that's really important for our communication and driving change out of this as well. Yeah, when we were talking to Suzanne in her handover before she left Aura, she was instrumental in doing this. So a big thank you to Suzanne Looked for all the work that she put into this. She was saying key to changing the client behaviour is going to be us being able to clarify what's in it for me. So for some of the clients that are slower to adopt this or don't quite see the point, then yeah, these are one of the points of evidence of you want the best people giving you their best effort. I bumped into someone at Quirks who was saying to me, great is discretionary. So there's a load of people doing good work, but if you really want great work, you have got to motivate them, make them feel part of something bigger, and this can be a way of doing it. Yeah, brilliant. So I'm just going to wrap up on a couple more slides and then we'll still have time for a little bit more questions. So just to clarify, working well together for us is a voluntary code We've said for client-side researchers, because that's obviously the bit that we're trying to influence as Aura. We have a lot of client-side members. We'd love for non-members to join in as well. But your point, Nick, is really valid in this broader ecosystem. Sometimes we're client and sometimes we're supplier, and there could be some of these principles that we try and live in different parts of the ecosystem, hoping that we then win overall. So it is open to anyone working client-side, not just Aura members. It's about preventing those little things becoming big problems. We're not diminishing serious mental health issues and illnesses. They exist along a spectrum, and there are people that need support and some really serious problems. So we don't want to belittle any of those things. We're just trying to focus on the bit where we have unintended consequences and we can try and stop some of those little things becoming big problems. It's a complement to other things that are happening, other things that happen within organisations, other things that are happening within industry bodies like the MRS, but we felt this is the bit that we as Aura can really champion, so we're uniquely placed to contribute. It can't be a checklist for every single project because that's not how you change behaviour, to have a big daunting list of stuff you've got to do. And some of these things are going to be outside of the client team's control, like a nightmare stakeholder, a market circumstance changes and the objectives have to change, a procurement team that restrict what we can do. So we also want to get that message across to clients because we don't want them to be daunted by feeling like I cannot sign up to this charter because I cannot commit to every single one. This is about a movement towards doing all of these 6 things well. And some of the members we've spoken to have said, right, I'm going to spend a few months just focusing on number 2 and making sure that we as a team have mobilised around that before we move on to another one. So we're hoping it becomes quite accessible. Ways that you can get involved. So please do visit our website, aura.org. And we've got content on LinkedIn as well, which Julia continues to post. So you can read the charter, and as you can see here, it's got some headings and bullet points under each one. So it fleshes out a little more about what we mean. We've got the report that Nick and others fed into that summarises the themes that we're trying to address. You can register your support. There is a form for the client side working well together supporters. Those are the ones I'm going to be communicating with for a feedback loop. So I'm setting up some Zoom calls next month to have a chat about this, to get some positive examples of why and how this can help, and over time, positive examples of impact that can then drive more people towards working in this way. But you can also sign up as an agency supporter. And again, that gives me contact details of people to go back to say, I need some help amplifying this message. I need your feedback on how to help us get around this barrier. We're also thinking of doing a bigger consultation in the autumn winter time to go back to some of the early client signatories and get some of that feedback documented to say what impact has this had. And this all feeds into the momentum of keeping up this project. And please do follow us on LinkedIn and amplify our messages, as we've seen some lovely agency partners do over the last couple of weeks. So ways that you can help. Can you talk to your clients about this? And if so, I'd love to hear how it's best to introduce those, because I'm very conscious of the clients who need to pay attention to this in particular are the ones it might be harder to raise it to. So you can't exactly go, well, let me tell you about this thing about working well together because this is feeling really sticky. It's going to be a bit more tricky than that. So I'd love to hear examples of how to introduce it sensitively, because I think that's the kind of trick and technique that we'll all benefit from. Please do support our content on LinkedIn and help us amplify that. Comment, repost, join in on that so that our message reaches more widely. If you have examples of positive impact, if you see it pop up from a client and they have reference they are working in this way, we're encouraging our clients and signatories to use the logo and expressly discuss the principles before, during or after a project. And then this consultation we're doing in the autumn winter time, I've got a couple of volunteers already, but if anyone wants to help with that, then I can add you to the list and we can figure out what that would be nearer the time, in the spirit of course, respecting everyone's time. I would figure out how that can be mutually beneficial. What do you think, Nick, about how this community can help this initiative?
Well, I suppose I'm happy to act as a conduit. So I was thinking, if there are kind of feedback that you want me to kind of feedback through to the Aura team, then please, I'm more than happy to take ideas on board. I think it would also be good just, you know, as Danny was saying before, rather than us kind of being the going about payment terms, also to collect some good examples of things that people have done or where things have worked really well. I think sometimes positive reinforcement is the way forward to kind of go, here's a really great example as to how this has worked and what difference it's made, would be really useful. So any ideas from that point of view would help. And I suppose thirdly, just thinking almost as if we could embed it in our ways of working with each other. Many of us partner with each other on various projects. I think that would be, and be open to be held accountable on that. I'm not going to end up, if someone thinks I'm not doing these things, I'm happy to be challenged on it. I think that would be a good thing too.
Brilliant. Thanks, Nick. And we really appreciate your support. Danny had asked in the chat, how are sign-ups going? To be honest, slower than I expected. We give clients the option to say, I'm signing up on behalf of myself or my company. And I've got a few more for myself rather than my company. So I think that's a good thing, that I can commit to doing it, even if I can't necessarily say on behalf of my brand for doing it. But I think it's also not clear to clients why I'm asking them to sign up. So I'm trying to emphasize now it's because then I have contact details as well as a tally to show the kind of weight of this. And then I've got a lot of agency supporters, and that's brilliant. And I've just gone back to everyone in the last couple of weeks to say, you said, how can you help? Here's some things where you can help amplify our content, give me examples of impact. So just in the last couple of minutes, does anyone want to ask any further questions, either on the chat or if you want to come off mute and ask us directly, or any other thoughts? So someone's mentioned in the chat about government procurement to influence their policies. So procurement is a bigger topic than I have energy for, I'm afraid. So when we think about what we can influence as the Aura Council, so we are run by 5 of us volunteer directors with 3 of our lovely contractors. Procurement is clearly a topic, but it's not one that hits all of our members. So I think there's something in it. I think it might be something that the Senior Client Council might want to take forwards, especially since they tend to be the bigger organisations who have those procurement departments. We do have some government bodies within the Aura membership, and one of them, UK HSA, Health Security Agency. They are advocates of this. They are making it work within their procurement framework. So Libby joined us on the panel, it works with me and Nick. So there are definitely ways in. Any other thoughts or questions?
Just an example, just an example on that one, Ruth. So I won't name them, but I had a client whose standard payment terms are 60 or 90 days. And very kindly at the beginning, they were like, you're a micro business, we'll sign up to 30. And then as we went on to the relationship, like, Nick, I'm getting so much heat from procurement, you're an outlier, you're the only one, we're going to have to move you on to 60. And I was like, well, that's not great. I'm going to already pay my fuel providers. So I said, well, we're going to move you on to 60, but you can just invoice us all up front. So essentially, that way it kind of works out. So, I'm trying to manage a corporate organization where procurement are going to keep on at me unless I get you on 60 days. But I'm going to do that in a way that essentially to you doesn't make any difference. And I mean, it's one of those kind of ridiculous kind of managing corporate life, etc. But I thought for me, that was a real sense of that we are all in this together. So if you sign up to the 60 days, kind of between us, we've now got an arrangement that says, don't worry, I'll make sure it doesn't hurt you. You're helping me because I'm not getting it in the air from procurement, and I'm going the extra mile saying just invoice me 100% up front. It'll still get signed off through the PO. And between us, we've kind of navigated this slightly odd procurement situation. So that for me is the very kind of the spirit of this, where between us, we've kind of gone, all right, well, that'll work. And then it removes this kind of admin hell from both of us that we were getting from procurement. So I think it's almost the spirit of this that for me is really important, just thinking about how you can work together, that everybody finds a constructive way forward. Yeah, brilliant.
I think we could probably carry on for quite a lot longer with questions and answers. It's a really, really interesting discussion. Thank you so much to Ruth and Nick. Sorry, I've changed your name.
Weekends.
Thank you so much for giving up your time and taking us through this. It's a great initiative, and well done, and good luck with the rest of it. Thank you to everybody today for joining us. Do come and log in to a future webinar. There's lots of things happening in July. And yes, have a wonderful day, everyone. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for your support. Appreciate that. Hi, Julia.